The first item of business is consideration of business motion 21303 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out revisions to today's business. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak button now, and I call on Graham Day to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 21303 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. Next item of business is statement by Fiona Hislop on the economy and COVID-19. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Fiona Hislop for 20 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as COVID-19 continues to spread globally, we are seeing major uncertainty in terms of financial markets, supply chains and the functioning of the global economy. The scale of this economic crisis could see GDP shrink by 5% over a 3-month period, based on the economy operating at an 80% capacity. The 5% hit to GDP is also contingent on most businesses still being able to function during this period. The overall economic impact is clearly likely to be significant, albeit potentially temporary, though the scale and duration of the impact is difficult to predict. Depressed economic activity this year will have implications for the public finances through lower tax receipts and higher welfare spending. This will have severe economic consequences, and we are treating it as an economic emergency triggered by the enormity of the health emergency. The Scottish Government has 3 main aims. Firstly, to keep companies in business and keep productive capacity so that they can recover. Secondly, and related to this, to keep staff in employment with appropriate income protection and support. And thirdly, and most importantly, staff need support to self-isolate and provide care to loved ones. And that is why it is in everyone's interest, individuals, businesses and government, to help companies through this period. The key impacts on business are through cash flow. However, this is not uniform, and some businesses are being impacted immediately, whilst others will be impacted over a longer period of time. We are aware of businesses reducing working hours and laying off staff. The pace of this is faster than we would see normally and reflects the scale of impacts across some sectors of the economy. So our immediate focus is therefore on supporting well-functioning, profitable companies facing immediate collapse in demand. I welcome the further support announced by the Chancellor, and the Scottish Government will pass all consequentials to businesses to help them through this challenging period. The First Minister has already confirmed that every penny of what we receive will go to supporting Scottish businesses and their employees. I can confirm today that we will be replicating the package of measures in full. We've already confirmed our intention to effectively freeze the poundage rate next year, and today I can confirm that we will mirror the package of measures announced by the Chancellor. That will ensure the small businesses receiving the Small Business Bonus Scheme or Rural Relief will be eligible for a £10,000 grant. We will provide 12 months relief for properties in hospitality, leisure and retail, and provide a £25,000 grant for hospitality, leisure retail, and a rateable value between £18,000 and £51,000 will apply to that grant. Loans are important, but debt is still debt, and we need the UK Government to help companies with more support. We need an agreed economic framework in place with the UK Government. We must think beyond that last crisis. This is potentially of greater order of magnitude and a different type of shock. The Chancellor talked about a bridge for business, but we need more than a bridge. In many cases, we need to protect capacity until demand returns. We need to see substantial grant support and tax breaks to keep companies in business and people in jobs where possible, and a greater emphasis on supporting individuals and households. In particular, I am today asking the UK Government to reduce cost pressures on business through, for example, tax holidays, through PAYE breaks, VAT reduction and the suspension of the apprenticeship levy. Reviewing competition policy to ensure markets remain equitable and regulations are put in place to safeguard consumers from price hikes. To date, we have had a positive working relationship with the UK Government. I spoke to Alex Sharma, the Secretary of State of Bays, and at my suggestion, he agreed to a quadrilateral telephone conference with the devolved administrations, and that took place this morning. So I will continue to work closely with them and the other devolved administrations, as this situation will require a coordinated response. And it is important that we repurpose whatever economy activity capacity we can mobilise to support the health response. It is also vitally important that fair work principles support the current situation. And this morning I met with the STUC and a number of affiliate unions precisely to discuss that. And I want to make it clear that we in government expect of ourselves as employers, private sector employers, public sector employers and the third sector. I want to make clear that we are in an emergency situation, but taking the time to work out what we do with unions and your staff means the country as a whole will be better off. Engagement with businesses and unions is crucial. I met the SUC and business leaders on the 11th of March. There are calls 3 times a week that have been arranged with business organisations to share information and gather intelligence. With other devolved administrations and the UK Government, we launched the COVID-19 helplines to support businesses on the 13th of March, augmenting the Find Business Support website, which is the best way for businesses to find the information they need. And there's also a separate HMRC helpline on tax issues as well. We are all operating in unprecedented, challenging and fast-moving situation, and we need to keep this in mind. The helpline has been inundated with calls in light of the recent announcements, going from a normal day of approximately 50 calls per day to 100 per hour and around 2,200 calls in total yesterday. The staff at the helpline should be commended for their efforts in dealing with the high volume of inquiries. Most of the inquiries were about new business rate support, and we're working hard to expand the information website to make sure that the information is available so that fewer businesses need to use the helpline to get the answers they need. And we will take that approach as we move forward and recognise the need to deliver better and at pace. On the 14th of March, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance announced the Scottish Government's £320 million support package. It was an immediate response to the UK budget, which included a mix of rates relief and grants for small businesses. Further details are being worked up and will be publicised as soon as possible. Our initial immediate response was well received by business organisations, but so much more is needed, particularly after Monday's health announcements. And that is why the scale of the response is necessary. And our support for businesses isn't just financial. We are looking at where we can temporarily loosen the regulatory burden on businesses to enable them to focus their efforts as much as possible on business continuity or adaptation to ensure that they can continue to pay their staff. The Chief Planner has already written to councils urging them to restrict planning restrictions around delivery hours for supermarkets. Today, he will write to local authorities urging them not to enforce planning restrictions on pubs and restaurants in order to allow them to operate temporarily as takeaways, enabling them to adapt their businesses while allowing people to remain at home in response to COVID-19. This guidance would be kept under review and updated as appropriate. And having listened to the views of stakeholders, we have agreed to extend the go-live date for the deposit return scheme from April 2021 to July 2022. This will give businesses more time to prepare their premises for the scheme and crucially provides flexibility in the immediate term. We have also halted the legislative process for the transient visitor levy or tourist tax. The financial support that is needed cannot come from government alone. We will look to share costs across public and private sectors in a way that is fair and benefits mitigation, but also prospects for recovery. And we are working closely with the banking sector to ensure that people and businesses are able to access the financial support that they need during this difficult time. The banks have moved swiftly, mobilising £20 billion of finance across the UK. The critical message for citizens and businesses is that if you foresee financial challenges in the future, talk to your bank now, even if you're not currently experiencing difficulties. The sooner they are able to understand your situation, the more likely they are able to help. And we are in urgent discussions with the banks in respect to their contribution to tackling the crisis. The First Minister will also convene an emergency meeting of FISAB, the Financial Services Advisory Board, to ensure a coordinated approach between government and the financial sector. And I will also be seeking an urgent meeting with the insurance industry to discuss how we can work with them to support business. The Scottish Government cannot act alone in the current situation. The Finance Secretary will write to all local authorities, urging them to respond positively to requests from ratepayers for payment deferrals for a fixed period. We will continue to work with our partners to ensure that individuals facing redundancy continue to be supported through our Partnership Action for Continuing Employment initiative. And we are already looking at what can be done in the areas of procurement and payment to help relieve the pressure on buyers and suppliers through procurement policy advice, hopefully helping to free up resources to focus on business continuity. And we're working with suppliers to the Scottish Government to assess the impact of coronavirus on the delivery of relevant goods and services and the extent to which supply contingencies are already in place. And as well as working across administrations, I am keen to work across party boundaries, given the scale of the situation that we are in. In the first instance, Kate Forbes and I will be meeting with economy and finance spokespersons of the other parties tomorrow. To conclude, Presiding Officer, as my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport has said, our nation faces a challenge to its way of life and to public health in a manner that has never been seen before in our lifetimes. This challenge is not just a public health one, it is an economic one as well. We live in unprecedented times, and it needs purpose, determination and cooperation to achieve what we need to achieve, to work together for the benefit of people and families across Scotland.
There will now be questions on the statement, and I intend to allow up to around 3 o'clock for this. So if all those who would wish to ask a question would press the request to speak buttons. It's also been agreed that questions can be directed to the other Cabinet Secretary sitting on the front bench just now. So it would be useful if those asking questions could let me know which Cabinet Secretary they would like to respond in Transport and Infrastructure, Tourism, Finance, or indeed Cabinet Secretary for the Economy herself. And first of all, call Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I begin by reiterating what Jackson Carlaw said yesterday in terms of the support from these benches for the Scottish Government's general approach to the coronavirus crisis? And can I restate the Scottish Conservatives' support for the First Minister and her government as they respond to this emergency? That is especially so when it comes to the economy and assisting not just Scotland's business community, but also Scotland's workers wherever they may be. Last night, the Chancellor unveiled a substantial package of measures to assist business, equating to over £1.9 billion for the Scottish Government. And can I acknowledge and welcome the fact that the First Minister has confirmed that every penny of that will be spent on business support in Scotland. Some of the actions outlined are applicable UK-wide and others are not. And given that a range of businesses in England will now have effectively 100% rates relief, many businesses in Scotland expected the same assistance. So I was very pleased and grateful that the Cabinet Secretary has confirmed the Scottish Government will adopt an identical approach and will replicate the UK package. I listened carefully to what she said about the helpline, and I think this question is directed to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance. But can I ask her about the mechanics of accessing support, given the need for this process to be both fast and straightforward? Businesses large and small want to know urgently if they are eligible for support, how they can access support, where they can access support, and when they can access support. And can the Cabinet Secretary for Finance give any further details in that regard.
Kate Forbes.
For that question, for his reiteration of willingness to work on a cross-party basis. And of course, when it comes to cross-government work, we're trying to replicate on the financial side the good work that's already taking place on the operational response to coronavirus. In terms of the specific questions that he asks, my colleague Fiona Hislop has confirmed that we will be mirroring the announcement that was made by the Chancellor yesterday. And so in terms of eligibility, I can confirm that further details will be put online so that businesses can identify quickly and easily whether they're eligible. So we have used the rate system in the same way that the English local authorities will be using to distribute the grants as quickly and as effectively as possible. So that will be the £10,000 grant for all small businesses in receipt of the small business bonus or of the rural bonus scheme, and £25,000 grants for businesses in the hospitality sector, and that's hospitality as defined again by the rates system. Obviously, when it comes to the rates relief, that will be relatively automatic because it will come into force on the 1st of April, which is when businesses will be getting their bills anyway. So that will be for those in hospitality, leisure and retail. And again, there will be a list online for businesses to identify whether or not they are eligible in particular for those reliefs. The point I would make is that we are moving as quickly as possible to ensure that the resources will be distributed fast. It is quite an operation to ensure that these businesses get the resources they need quickly, but I would hope that there will be further information online imminently so that businesses can check if they're eligible or not.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I also welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement and her recommitment to a cross-party approach, which we will certainly reciprocate from these benches. We said last week that we welcomed the extension and underwriting of statutory sick pay to small business employees who self-isolate. But of course, £94.25 a week is not enough to live on, and we want the Scottish Government to consider topping this up. The Cabinet Secretary, in a statement, and I think I quoted correctly, spoke of staff in employment. But she will know that not all staff in employment are employees. And my question is about those people, 250,000 of whom are in Scotland, who are part of what's now known as the precariat, the self-employed delivery drivers, the zero-hours hospitality workers, the agency workers in factories across Scotland with unstable hours. What support can the Scottish Government give them when they self-isolate, when they are laid off with no work, or when they have to take time off to look after children who from next week cannot attend school or nursery?
Fiona Hislop.
I made it clear in my statement that the more needs to be done than simply tackling the business rates issue and indeed the grants, however strong that package is, precisely because of the points that Richard Leonard makes. Clearly, self-employed, freelancers, as well as those on contracts that are precarious, have got real and distinct needs. Some of those issues will be able to be dealt with by the Hardship Fund, which has already been announced in terms of funding, and there will be additional information available tomorrow in the statement that we made in relation to that from my Cabinet colleagues. But I think in terms of a package that is particular to them, the two things need to happen. One, I think in relation to his first point about statutory sick pay, there has to be eligibility there. So therefore, yes, the ceiling coming down in relation to access to benefits via the job centre is welcome, but there will be people who will still be earning a certain amount and they will not therefore be eligible for the benefit side of things. So that still has to be addressed. We're operating quickly and rapidly in relation to the resources that we have, in relation to businesses and indeed to the grant system to help support people in employment. But I have agreed, when we met yesterday with the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, that we need something specific for self-employed and those are freelancers. And I also maybe take the opportunity at this point to mention that I expect money to remain in the system from the public sector where there are contracts being deployed. And I know, for example, Creative Scotland, who are operating in an area where there are many either self-employed artists or freelancers, are precisely looking at a way to keep money in the system, to honour contracts, to make sure there's a regular income coming in. But that's an area where there's more to be done. Some of it will be from the Scottish Government, but there will also be a requirement for the UK Government. And that was one of the issues that I addressed in the quadrilateral meeting with the Minister from the UK Government when I spoke to him this morning.
We'll move on to the open questions, and I have a lot of people who want to ask. So we now call Andy Whiteman, followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank the Cabinet Secretary for the statement. This question is for the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy. In this current crisis, we need a special focus on priority businesses, businesses that are critical. We need a focus on business continuity, and we need, above all, a focus on providing a basic income for everybody in the workplace. The UK's announcements yesterday on loan guarantees is useless for many businesses who will not be able to get a loan because of their cash flow forecasts. On non-domestic rate relief, that's useless for self-employed, small and medium enterprise. You don't pay non-domestic rates anyway. So I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary can explain why she said in her opening statement that she intends to replicate the UK package in full, when much of it is not, I would argue, strictly relevant or a priority for making sure that we have an economy that can come out at the end of this that's focused on priority businesses, focused on continuity, and focused on providing a basic income for everybody.
Fiona Hislop.
Despite the scale of the announcement by the Chancellor yesterday, there is more to be done. We can do things differently. We've already, in terms of the announcement on Saturday, been more flexible to what is required from the Scottish Government. Indeed, the FSB statement in an interview this morning indicated that there are things that we can and should do differently. I absolutely appreciate that. In terms of income, in relation to income, I think one of the areas that we need to realistically explore, and again I raised that in discussions on the quadrilateral meeting of economy ministers this morning, is some system of wage support that maintains people in employment at such times as till such times as the capacity of their companies can be restarted, should there be, as we might anticipate in some areas, downturns. But his point is quite specific. That also has to apply to people who are not in employment. And that's one of the areas where there has to be, I think, coordination between the benefit system that the UK has, also in relation to what we can do within the limited powers we have in our welfare. And again, my colleagues are looking at what we can do in that in relation to the hardship fund and other activity we can within the Scottish Government. We can't do everything immediately. We have started at pace. I think the scale of what we're dealing with, the pace at which we have to respond, which we need to move swiftly to get as much resource in terms of cash and revenue in the system, but we also have to have the capacity to respond flexibly to the specific needs of areas identified by Andy Whiteman and indeed by Richard Leonard.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by restating that the Liberal Democrats fully support all of the work of the Scottish Government in this time of national crisis. Edinburgh Airport provides 7,500 jobs in my constituency. They sustain a much wider ecosystem of businesses across both Edinburgh and across Scotland. The impact of the virus will decimate their business to the point of viability, and they are not alone. 21cc is an events company that has seen £2 million turnover wiped out overnight, while Christopherson Village Playgroup is a charity which only employs 5 childcare workers but sustains other people to go to work, now on the verge of collapse. All the different kinds of business, and along with the taxi drivers, fitness instructors, hairdressers who've been in touch with me in the last 24 hours, all now face an existential threat which will force them to shed staff if urgent reassurance is not given to them. Can the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy confirm that the measures described will help all of these businesses survive, be they company, charity or sole trader?
Well, the member has asked that the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy respond. Are you happy to...
Whoever feels best able.
Whoever... I'm hesitant to say whoever feels most able.
I mean, The brief point is that a number of the businesses that Alex Cole-Hamilton have mentioned will indeed be included in the specific either relief measures or grant measures that have been announced today. But he touches on a number of other businesses, and I think it's worth putting on record that as 4 Cabinet Secretaries here and more, we are working as a team in order to support all the businesses that will be impacted by the coronavirus. And that will include the conversations that my colleague Michael Matheson has been having, for example, with Edinburgh Airport. So we want to ensure that we work at pace. We've moved very quickly from yesterday's announcement to ensure that there is support in place for Scottish business and people, but clearly there's more to be done, and we're keen to work on a cross-party basis to understand the concerns that members have and then respond appropriately.
Maureen Watt, followed by Maurice Golden.
Is that sufficiently bland?
Sir, last night I was contacted by a creel fisherman in my constituency raising concerns that much of the fishing industry will not qualify for business support grants, given that many businesses do not pay rates on account of them having no onshore premises. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what support will be available for such businesses in the fishing industry?
Fergus Ewing.
Maureen Watt is absolutely right to raise this issue, as members from all parties have with me, in respect of primarily inshore fishermen and their crew, and shellfish businesses and processors, who in particular have suffered enormous economic shocks, even shocks before the virus. The loss of the brown crab market in China caused massive damage to many businesses, but now this crisis has exacerbated it, particularly for the shellfish sector, and therefore I am able to confirm to Maureen Watt, firstly, that yesterday I had a conference call with, I think, around about 30 stakeholders representing the whole of the fishing sector, where we discussed a very wide range of issues, and secondly, that this morning I pursued discussions with officials and that we are working hard on a package of support directed to those who will need support the most. Obviously, we need to work up that package specifically for the fishing sector. Maureen Watt refers to the fact that, that many of these businesses do not have an office, a shop, bricks and mortar premises. They do have a fishing vessel. Very often those vessels are subject to loan commitments which require to be paid. So this is a different sector. It needs to be treated very sympathetically. We are doing that. We are working on a package. And, Presiding Officer, with your permission, I would hope and expect to come back to this chamber as soon as I can with details to ensure that those who are suffering in this sector around the country, particularly in the inshore sector, do receive sufficient financial support to tide them over the duration of this crisis. And, of course, one of the challenges is none of us know exactly how long that period will be.
Maurice Golden, followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. How will public procurement, including via government agencies and funded organisations, be used to pump prime the economy to support businesses, contractors, as well as the third sector?
Kate Ford.
Yes, so we are very mindful, as Fiona Hislop said earlier, of the fact that procurement can keep money in the system. And so our commitment is to ensure that we continue to honour contracts. And we already pay 98% of invoices within 10 days of receipt. And we are testing our payments process and systems to make sure that that level of performance can be maintained in light of any direction to work from home rather than the office.
Willie Coffey, followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary for the economy just how we and the wider public can support our local businesses better to help them maintain their cash flows at this difficult time?
Fiona Hislop.
I think everybody understands that there are immediate pressures, that well-functioning organisations and businesses are facing a collapse in demand. There has to be, and we've seen fantastic community responses in terms of support for the elderly, for making sure that there can be support in many different ways. But if you have a local business that you want to see survive and continue to exist on your high street in your town, please think of going and buying a voucher for future in terms of whether it's a restaurant, in terms of a future a meal at some point when this all comes through, when we want to get back together in with friends and family, whether it's your hairdresser or wherever it is, everybody can do something. If you have cash, if you have a salary and you have that capability and you are saving money because you're not going out, please think of buying and pre-purchasing vouchers that support your local community. So we can have a community social response, but we can also have a community economic response.
Rhoda Grant, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask for clarification whether replicating UK business support includes 100% rates relief for companies with a rateable value under £51,000 and whether there will be any levers attached to business support and assistance to protect jobs and to ensure that the benefits are passed on, for example, mortgage holidays in the buy-to-let market?
Kate Forbes.
So in terms of the rates relief specifically, I can confirm that the rates relief for all businesses in hospitality, leisure and retail applies irrespective of threshold. So of course we made the announcement on Saturday that it would extend to those under the threshold of 69,000 in rateable value, but our announcement today confirms that all businesses will get that relief in those three sectors, and that overrules the commitment that was made on Saturday. We've been very clear in our engagement with business, in the announcements we've made, and also in considering these relief package, that we don't expect this package of support just to extend to the business structures, but it must be used to protect jobs and to ensure that employees have money in their wallets and ensure that they can continue with the support that they need. In terms of mortgages, so there's a lot of work going on with the banks in particular to ensure that whether it comes to mortgages or debt arrears or other things, that the banks are sympathetic in terms of those payments. And I know that Fiona Hislop is meeting with the banks shortly next week to discuss how we can work together to support people.
Kenneth Gibson, followed by Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A crisis brings out the best in some people and the worst in others. In my constituency, Scotland's largest producer of alcohol-based sanitising gel, TR Bonnyman, has seen the price of alcohol supplied to it rocket from £500 to £3,500 a tonne. What steps will be taken to tackle individuals and companies allegedly profiteering from the impact of COVID-19?
Fiona Hislop.
When I spoke to the Secretary of State yesterday, one of the areas that I raised was the potential and therefore the need for a prevention of price hikes in relation to energy and other areas. But I think that example that Kenneth Gibson has raised shows that there are people who want to exploit people and companies in very, very difficult circumstances. I would commend those particularly distilleries that are actually redeploying their equipment to hand sanitisers, etc. That is a good example of businesses responding positively. But exploitation of the economy at this very difficult time is absolutely inexcusable. Everybody has a responsibility to support businesses, and I think anything that can be done in relation to competition policy and also to make sure that there isn't that activity has to be addressed, and it's something that we will continue to monitor. I think the example of that, if the member could forward it to us, and we'll see what regulations we have or indeed what powers the UK has to try and restrict such, I think, unacceptable behaviour during an economic emergency.
Murdo Fraser, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure I'm not the only member in the Chamber who's been contacted by local businesses expressing concern at the time it's taken to get through on the government's helpline. Indeed, some people have given up altogether. Now, given the importance that's attached to this line, will the Scottish Government look at increasing the resources available? I know those working on it are working very hard already, but can we look at allocating more staff? And can we look at potentially extending the opening hours of the helpline into the evening or perhaps at the weekend so businesses can access the information they're desperate to get?
Fiona Hislop. When the helpline was launched, which was only last Thursday, it's less than a week ago, it was done in conjunction with the UK Government, so therefore there's a Scottish dedicated helpline that identifies support within Scotland. Clearly, the announcement that was made on Monday which is less than 48 hours ago in terms of the announcement, has precipitated quite a considerable concern in terms of businesses' expectation. We obviously had the announcement, which was only on Saturday, of the immediate response to the budget. So we completely understand people wanting to access information. Yesterday, I spoke to Scottish Enterprise after a number of members had contacted me to ensure that they were scaling up the activity in terms of the resource available. But I think his points about this is a critical service that people need to be able to access. I gave you the scale, the sheer scale of activity in terms of number of calls, and there's a commitment to, yes, constantly update and improve the information, even as of today, but also to make sure there's the capacity and capability for people to get responses when they need them. And I think people have to bear with us. We are going through an economic emergency, and people are scaling up at pace, and we should thank those that are doing that service for us, as I appreciate Murdo Fraser has just done.
Pauline McNeill, followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you. A question probably for the Cabinet Secretary for Employment and Fair Work. Glasgow has the largest number of pubs and clubs outside London, with thousands of jobs, many young people in that industry and part-time contracts. I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary is aware that the sector feel that they really don't know what to do this weekend when people have been advised not to go, but yet they are still going to be open for business. Do you think there will be any more clarity on that towards the weekend? But is it possible the Cabinet Secretary could publish the current rules on layoffs for staff? My point is that if staff can get continuity of employment where it gets to a really difficult point, is better than being dismissed from your employment, because you would maintain your employment rights.
Fiona Hislop.
The point about fair work is absolutely critical. We need to try and keep as many people in employment as possible. Where that's not possible, we have to find a way of trying to support businesses for wage subsidies. There isn't a scheme for that just now, but I think that's where we're going to end up. In terms of some of the other aspects, I know clearly the insurance issue was a major issue. I understand from my conversation this morning with the UK Government that John Glenn, the relevant minister, has had reassurances from insurers that they will honour those contracts where there is provision for pandemic infections in the economy. That might not necessarily affect everyone. It depends on what insurance policies they have. So that's a bit of progress even since yesterday, and some of the concerns that I know a lot of the clubs had. Your point about the rules and regulations, they're expected. I think there is something about people should absolutely be supporting the contracts and the employment contracts people already have, honouring their responsibilities in terms of employment legislation. But by giving businesses confidence that they can continue over the next few months, the measures are considerable in terms of not only the relation to hospitality in relation to the rates relief for the year, but there's also the £25,000 grant. These areas are going to be important to many areas, and that would allow them a bit of confidence, a bit of time to plan, to talk to their banks, to see what's possible, and to make sure that they can continue their relationship with all these many young people who are working in this very important sector.
Alistair Allen, followed by Alexander Burnett.
In many constituencies like my own, where tourism and hospitality sectors play a major role, there is, of course, widespread anxiety about the economic consequences of the COVID-19 outbreak. One small business in the islands I spoke to on Tuesday had just taken 70 cancellations in the space of 1 hour. This is coming, of course, at the worst possible time of year in terms of cash flow, and as things stand, many tourists and other businesses are wondering how they can get through this financially. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy what can be done to direct people quickly to sources of Scottish and UK Government help, particularly in tourist-dependent areas of the country?
The Cabinet Secretary for Economy would prefer that it's the Cabinet Secretary for Tourism. Is that all right?
Yep.
Yeah. Fergus.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Dr Allen raises a very important question that affects a great many people throughout the country in the tourism, hospitality and leisure sectors. I mean, quite simply, for many businesses operating in this area, they have lost all their revenue. There are no visitors. Things have shut down. That means that we need to help these businesses survive and get through this period. And that's why I very much welcome the specific measures that have been announced specifically for properties, for businesses in hospitality, leisure and retail. including the small business bonus rural relief of grant of £10,000, the £25,000 grant for hospitality, leisure and retail properties with a rateable value between 18 and 51,000. These measures, I think, go far more towards what is required than the initial response of the UK government, although I say that with no criticism. It's the developing scene. It's obvious now that the initial UK response wasn't adequate, and it has been substantially enhanced. However, we will continue to listen very carefully to Dr Allen's constituents and others over the coming days to make sure that other matters that are required to protect and preserve these great businesses in this important sector, arguably the most important sector of the Scottish economy by some measures, and we will listen carefully to them, particularly with regard to their staffing needs, the interests of their staff, as the Cabinet Secretary of the Economy has already indicated, where we do believe that more needs to be done. But we will listen very carefully. But today's announcement, I think, will, I hope, go some considerable way to providing some hope for these businesses, many of whom, quite frankly, have had very little sleep over the past week in worrying about the future and indeed survival of businesses that they've spent their life building up.
Alexander Burnett, followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Some people are taking their own view as to the use of cash, with some shops taking cards only. There are, however, some shops which can't take cards or electronic payments, particularly in rural areas, and some groups of people, particularly the elderly, who rely on cash. So can I ask the Finance Secretary what conversations she's been having with banks to ensure the continued circulation and availability of cash, particularly in rural areas?
Kate Forbes.
This is part of a much broader conversation that I have regularly with banks around the provision of cash and also the reduction, particularly of free-to-use ATMs in rural areas. I have in the past met with the Payment Services Regulator as well as Link in order to ensure that there is still access to cash without paying for it, and also working with businesses to ensure that they still take cash, because clearly, particularly in rural areas, businesses and individuals are dependent on cash. In order to do that, they need to access cash, but they also need to expect businesses to take cash, and we'll continue to have that conversation.
Jackie Bailey, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Presiding Officer, I also have a number of tourism-related businesses in my constituency, hotels, visitor attractions and cruise operators. They are reporting large-scale cancellations. Their immediate concern is cash flow and their ability to pay the wages of their existing staff. And whilst the measures announced do go so far, for many of these businesses, their rateable value is above £51,000. Given that the government advice is not to travel and to stay away from restaurants and pubs, the problem has been made worse. There also appears to be little prospect of insurance companies paying out. So what urgent measures will the Cabinet Secretary for Tourism put in place to ease cash flow so that staff can be paid?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, Jackie Bailey is quite right to raise these matters, and the cruise sector is operative in a many number of constituencies, her own and my own, as it happens, and has been a notable success. So it's very important that we ensure that they do get commensurate support, and that we believe should be achieved by the announcement that the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy has made. And I can perhaps meet specifically with Jackie Bailey in order to continue the discussion, because I think we all recognise here that this announcement is being made in emergency circumstances. We have made the announcement today that we will replicate in full the support that was announced by the UK Chancellor yesterday, but we all recognise that in 24, 48 hours we can't provide all the questions. But we are absolutely determined to be open, transparent and to work with all members across all parties as quickly as we can to make sure that no one who has suffered and who has suffered the problem of cessation of their business effectively or substantial diminution of their revenue will be left without financial support. That's the key message, I think, that we are determined to convey and we are determined to deliver.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a question on the supply of goods for Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing. People are worried about the lack of paracetamol in our shops and supermarkets. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he can provide any assurances as regards the distribution arrangements here?
Ferguson.
Well, I have had 2 conference calls with supermarkets over the past week, and I'll just reiterate what I said yesterday in this chamber. The response of supermarkets and retail, broader retail sector, has been excellent, and they have been determined to ensure continuity of supply of all vital foodstuffs, but also sanitary products and the necessities of life. I haven't specifically as yet raised the important issue that Annabel Ewing has raised in the chamber, but I will now do so to follow that up to make sure that there is a sufficient supply of these products for which many will rely upon, particularly at this time.
Colin Smith, followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Cabinet Secretaries for Economy and Rural Economy have both said, the health announcement advising people to avoid, for example, restaurants and pubs has had a devastating impact on the food and drink sector. Any rates relief is obviously welcome, but the economic tsunami in that sector at the moment means that many of those, particularly small businesses, will either go bust or at least lay off staff within a matter of weeks, if not days. And can I ask if all governments are considering a scheme that's similar to the one proposed in Ireland at the moment, whereby businesses are being paid the equivalent of €203 per week to keep staff on that would otherwise have lost their job as a direct result of the health advice advising people not to use those particular businesses? A similar scheme, is that likely to happen?
Fiona Hislop.
2 points. Firstly, to reiterate that we are providing 12 months of rates relief for properties in hospitality, leisure and retail, and we will provide a £25,000 grant for hospitality, leisure and retail properties with a rateable value between 18,000 and 51,000. Now that will capture a great number of businesses. But his point about how we can keep people in employment is absolutely crucial. And it's one that I do think that on a cross-administration basis, I spoke to Ken Skates of Wales yesterday, and again, he was part of the quadrilateral discussion. I've spoken to Diana Dodds from Northern Ireland, the Economy Secretary there. We are all in agreement that the UK has to work with us to understand what we can try and do to keep people in employment. Now, we've responded rapidly since, obviously, the budget last Thursday, the package that was announced by Kate Forbes on Saturday, the announcement only yesterday evening by the Chancellor. We've responded to immediately in terms of what we're committing to in replicating some of those measures or all of those measures in relation to the rates relief, but also recognising that there's more to be done. And the area that I think that's more to be done is how we can make sure we're in the SME area, and particularly in restaurants, hospitality, which is most immediately affected, but other areas will be as well. Can we have a system that would enable people to keep people in employment, keep their income supported? I'm not saying what level that would be, what scheme that is. The other countries have different areas in terms of what that level might be, but I do think that will help in the process, and it's something that I am very determined to continue in my discussions with the UK government to try and see if we can see a route through, because there are businesses that will have to close for whatever reason, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the business has to end and the employment has to end. Let's find a way of getting us through what is a very difficult situation, but we understand there will be an end in sight. And with that on that basis, we can make sure that there's support to keep businesses operating and employees still working with their income supported.
John Mason, followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I don't mind who replies to this. Quite a lot of the assistance, and rightly so, is being targeted at small businesses and particularly the hospitality and leisure sectors. But I wonder if one of the government ministers can comment on what about larger businesses, say a hotel chain. Would they have to go to Westminster for a loan, or can we help them as well? And what about businesses in other sectors, for example, an international summer school based in Glasgow?
And that would be Kate Forbes.
Well, there is other support in place that was announced by the Chancellor yesterday. So, for example, there are larger corporate loan supports, and there's also expanding the business interruption loan scheme, which will be available for larger businesses. And I think the important thing is, in terms of what we're doing at the moment, we are targeting our support at the businesses that need it most urgently right now. but fully accept that the economic impact is going to have an impact on small businesses and large businesses, on businesses in rural areas and in urban areas. And clearly, therefore, whilst we are targeting our support right now, that support will need to continue to meet the challenges ahead.
Patrick Harvey, followed by Billy Rennie.
The health response is very much focused on flattening the curve of infections, but surely our economic response needs to flatten another curve as well, because the impact of this economically will fall most heavily on those who don't have the broadest shoulders in our society. The last economic crisis hit hardest on the most vulnerable. We must ensure that this one, as a result of the virus, doesn't also exacerbate inequality. Why then can we not ensure that the business support packages that are available are contingent on fair work practices? Precarious workers are being left on the scrap heap right now, already this week. Why is replicating the UK's policies in its entirety the right way of achieving the protection that many businesses are simply not offering?
Fiona Hislop.
I think the member raises a very important point. We made clear in our statement on Saturday when we announced the immediate response to the budget in terms of support for businesses that we would expect that fair work principles would be carried out by businesses, and indeed going forward that will be the territory that Scottish Enterprise in terms of its grants will be giving in terms of post-April activity in terms of their grants. But I want to make it clear we have to get cash and resources out quickly to businesses. The rate system is the quickest way to make sure we're tackling the cash flow issue. The point about trying to ensure that we support people, I absolutely agree, and I think it's part of my instructions, certainly as part of the government, as an employer, and I expect it from public agencies, etc., to help support the system that we have in place in terms of fair work and fair work principles. But the point he makes about supporting vulnerable individuals that may immediately be facing hardship, that is the subject of a statement tomorrow, which our Cabinet colleagues Aileen Campbell and Shirley-Ann Somerville have been preparing for in terms of the responses and what they can do in that territory. So we have to help swiftly. We do not want bureaucracy to tie up contingent grants. However desirable that might be, that would stop people necessarily accessing resources. But I do want to make it quite clear that where we can and where we will, we'll make sure that those fair work principles are carried through in terms of distribution of public money. But we are in an emergency, we have to work swiftly, and that is why we're carrying out the announcement that we made today, which follows extremely fast on the Chancellor's statement yesterday, to give businesses that confidence that they can see themselves through what is an extremely difficult situation.
Willie Rennie, followed by Gordon Lyndhurst.
Will the supply chain for the hospitality sector be included in support for that sector? Fisher's Laundry Services employs hundreds who service hotels across the country, and their trade has absolutely plummeted. So will they get business rate support? But also their laundries are under capacity just now, whereas imagine the NHS laundries will soon be incredibly busy. Is there a potential for them to work for the NHS sector, and can she have a word with the Health Secretary?
Kate Forbes.
Well, I think, firstly, Willie Rennie mentions laundry, and laundry would be classified as retail, and therefore they could be in receipt of the £10,000 small business grant if they're already in receipt of small business bonus scheme, but they'll also pay no rates because the rates relief will apply to all in hospitality, leisure and retail, irrespective of the threshold, so that would include laundry as well. And in terms of redeployment, that's absolutely something that we are looking at. Like I said earlier, we are approaching this as a team of different Cabinet Secretaries looking at different areas and working very collaboratively together to ensure that where there are opportunities to redeploy, those are done quickly and at pace.
Gordon Lyndhurst, followed by Stuart McMillan.
Will the Cabinet Secretary provide assurances that not just the employed, the self-employed, but also those operating as subcontractors will receive help and assistance? And I'm thinking in particular of those working in the personal and social care sectors.
Fiona Hislop.
I made it clear in my answers, I think my statement as well, in terms of where the public sector are involved in procurement. I think honouring contracts to make sure that the system is in place in terms of support for different areas. Subcontracting is a clear example. I think it's absolutely imperative that we support all businesses in all sectors, but clearly we have to prioritise. Anybody who is supporting the frontline response to COVID-19 in terms of social care and health, that has to be a priority. And clearly there are companies that are involved in the subcontracting and some of the social care services. And that can I just emphasise how clearly the Cabinet Secretary has prioritised not just health but social care as well. And that involves everybody that's involved. Obviously, there's public delivery by local authorities, but some of those local authorities are in contracting provision. So we have to ensure the health, the economic health of that sector in particular, to ensure that the service delivery that we will all need and will all rely on in terms of our friends, our families, our neighbours, can continue.
Stuart McMillan, followed by Lewis MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a question to the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy. Cabinet Secretary spoke earlier regarding the issue of the business support phone lines. Can she provide some further information regarding timescales for the extension of this, but also the issue of is there any other means of communication where businesses can actually utilise to get information about the support that's available? Thank you.
Fiona Hislop. A lot of the information that people are seeking is available online, and therefore as part of that support services, I've already referred to the streamlined, and that's a deliberate effort that has been made over recent times by Scottish Enterprise to ensure that it's a single portal that people can access information. So I would encourage people to look online first, because a lot of what their information they're looking for will be available online. As I said, quite acutely aware of the ramping up, the extreme ramping up that's required because of the announcement, particularly on Monday, that quite understandably was made for health reasons, has had immediate reactions in terms of the economic issues facing individual businesses. So as I gave assurances earlier on that I've spoken to the Chief Executive of Scottish Enterprise, who assured me that that ramping up has already and will continue to take place. But I would also refer people to the Fine Business Support website that I previously identified during my statement.
I am going to let this session run on a little bit, but I would ask that our people are still quite quick with their questions, because there's still quite a few people to get through. Lewis MacDonald, followed by Sandra White.
Thank you very much. A question for the Cabinet Secretary for Connectivity. We have heard from health ministers that testing for critical care workers will be made available as soon as possible to allow those workers who have shown symptoms but are not infected to return to work. Once that is achieved, can I ask if the Government has any such plans for key workers in sectors such as transport and logistics around essential goods and production and supply of energy?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, Mr MacDonald raises a very important issue, because we're undertaking a piece of work at the present time to identify key workers in a range of different sectors who are critical to our transport and logistics system in order to maintain good connectivity. Everyone within the sector recognises the central role that our transport system plays in helping to support communities, individuals and our economy. And our focus at the present time is to make sure that we keep the country moving as best we can within these very challenging circumstances. There are a number of elements to that which are absolutely critical to continuing to maintain good transport connectivity. And a number of the workforce play an important role in making sure that that is maintained. These are individuals which we are going through the process at the present time in government to identify in order to have a good understanding of those who would require prioritisation should those circumstances arise. So I can give the member that assurance that this is something which we recognise is important. I should say important in a number of different areas, including within our energy sector as well, in making sure that we continue to provide energy supplies. So that type of work is ongoing at the present time and will be considered overall as part of the Government's ongoing resilience strategy.
Sandra White, followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, I don't mind which one answers, if it's finance or economy. The Glasgow Kelvin constituency, which I represent, is home to, I'd probably say, most clubs, pubs, restaurants, etc., small businesses, large businesses as well. freelancers and creative industries. Many of these are closing down, and many of these people cannot even pay their rent. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, is there a timescale for the help to be delivered, and what specific help can be given from the Scottish Government to self-employed and freelancers who do not fit these specific categories as has been mentioned earlier?
Kate Forbes.
Timescale is as soon as possible. So as I mentioned earlier, the fastest way of getting either the grants out or the relief out, which obviously helps with cash flow, is through the rates system. So we're working with local authorities and assessors to try and mobilise this mass distribution of support as quickly as possible. Sandra White mentioned clubs, pubs, also music venues, cinemas, studios, galleries. These are all classified as retail and therefore would qualify for the 100% rates relief, irrespective of their rateable value. Some of them will also be small businesses, so we'll get the £10,000 grant. So we recognise the huge challenge facing them. We want to get that money to them as quickly as possible. We need to do that in a way that is not burdensome or bureaucratic, and that's why we're working through the rate system.
Brian Whittle, followed by John McAlpine.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think following on from the question there about the creative industries, I want to specifically look at the sport, film and production industry, which has been severely hit. I was contacted by a company who still have staff to pay, still have significant payments to be made to freelance journalists, but have found a healthy order book turned into zero turnover. So, and that means they have no collateral now to which to borrow against. So, I think a significant package is required to maintain that sector if we want to, because I think it's in danger of disappearing. And I wonder what advice the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy could give to that sector.
Fiona Hislop.
That's clearly a key sector. Again, in my discussions with the unions this morning, the BEC2 position was raised with me. I know Creative Scotland are working within their system in terms of what they can provide, and I think it's very important that we recognise that freelancers, and particularly in this area, are supported. They will be covered as part of the leisure provisions within the rates relief that we've just discussed, and also in relation to any grants that are available, depending on the size of their business as well.
John McAlpine, followed by Claudia Beamish.
Thank you. I'm also looking for details about what is available to the culture sector, in particular freelance practitioners, many of whom, indeed most of whom, have already had most of their work cancelled. And can also ask whether social enterprises and charities will qualify for support to survive this crisis, given that they also employ and contract many people in the arts and culture sector, and indeed right across the economy.
Fiona Hislop.
Well, clearly, in relation to social enterprises and charities, there are rates relief that exist, and will, again, in terms of additional support information for them, that will be covered as part of the social side of the response. In relation to freelancers and those that have had contracts cancelled, may I make it clear that as far as Creative Scotland is concerned, they are working on a scheme by which those that have already been given support to carry out work that cannot then therefore either be experienced or performed or indeed seen by others can still be honoured. They will want to respond themselves and how they will do that, but I think that's an important principle. Keeping money in the system to individuals is the key priority of what we can try and do just now. We can do that through businesses in terms of the rates relief, but there are other means by which we can do that.
Claudia Beamish, followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think this for the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, and the question is like us all. I have constituents on unsecure, even verbal contracts who are struggling to understand what rights they have. And I note, of course, and welcome the helpline that's been set up for businesses. Has the Scottish Government considered something similar to assist employees and the self-employed?
Kate Forbes.
In many ways, some of those questions will be answered when Aileen Campbell gives more of a statement around the response for charities, social enterprises, also individuals. So part of our commitment was to a hardship fund and to ensure that there's support. Where there's costs, for example, around council tax, to ensure that council tax reduction is able to help with those costs. So we intend this package to be a significant package of support for businesses in order to keep people in work, as well as to self-employed and those who work on a freelance basis to help with their costs as well. In terms of the banking response particularly, obviously a number of welfare provisions are our UK Government reserved, and we continue to work with them to ensure that as many people are supported as possible, and also working with the banks to ensure that where there are any issues around, as I said, debt arrears and other things, that they work sympathetically with people in order to ensure that they don't require those payments to be made.
Bob Doris, followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a question for the Cabinet Secretary for Finance. I've been contacted, Cabinet Secretary, by a constituent who works for an English language teaching school. They've understandably lost many students and are in financial peril. They do not believe they will be covered by the rates relief holidays that have previously been announced, and many schools will, because of the nature of the buildings they're in, have rateable values of up to £51,000 and not qualify for additional relief. I am told the schools in the sector employ 390 directly and 2,560 indirectly. How can the Scottish Government look to support this important sector?
Kate Forbes.
Well, clearly there are issues like that, and also, for example, for nurseries, where there is a significant impact which we are actively looking at in order to ensure that support goes as far as possible. One of the announcements I also made on Saturday was around, for example, ensuring that there wasn't an uplift in the poundage to ensure that nobody pays more tax next year, and that covers all properties. But clearly, where more help is needed, for the example that Bob Doris mentioned, I'd be happy to speak to him further about what kind of support we could put in place in order to give them support.
I have 3 questions left. If we're concise, I'll get them all in. And I forgot who's next. Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary for Culture said this was about our way of life, and she will know that the widespread closure of cultural venues and cancellation of performances is having a really immediate impact on the viability of these venues and the freelance creative crew and performers. As she said, Creative Scotland have made initial announcements and secured existing awards, but is there scope for an urgent refocus of Creative Scotland's funding to direct it towards individuals, and will there be additional resource to support this in any way?
Fiona Hislop.
As I said previously, Creative Scotland is responding, and I think once they're in a position to do so, they will make clear what their provision will be, particularly to protect individuals and to make sure that the RFOs are flexible. Can I say also, in relation to this, we've also got national companies and national collections who have got direct responsibility with ourselves as the Scottish Government. They will obviously clearly not be able to carry out their grant conditions as we would have wanted them to, but we want to make sure that resources are still there so they can pay individuals and they can ensure that individuals still receive the incomes that they need. So this is right across the board, not just Creative Scotland, but also in other areas of the culture and heritage perspective.
Alex Neil.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary for Economy to look at the issue whereby North Lanarkshire Council has told the contractor to stop the contract on Friday, and the contract is for installing safety equipment in houses like fire sprinklers and alarms. This will result in 100 redundancies, as well as many apprentices losing their apprenticeship. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if she will talk to North Lanarkshire Council and see if there's a way, if this very essential work can be continued, the jobs saved, and at the same time ensure that arrangements are made to ensure that nobody's put at unnecessary risk?
Fiona Hislop.
The member raises a very serious issue. I'm more than happy if you can correspond with me to outline what that is, but it's also part of that issue around procurement and contracting, and I think it's really incumbent on the public sector to honour the contracts they have to ensure that companies can keep themselves in business and therefore obviously the employees. But obviously he raises a safety issue in relation to the housing issue, so I'm happy to try and take that forward.
And the last question is Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for Economy for the answers so far. I wanted to raise an issue around supply chains. Clearly there's a importance to make sure there's a continuity of business, but the importance of maintaining strong supply chains across the UK is really important, because if we don't have that continuity of supply chains, what that means is not getting food and supplies to communities across the country, and risking people going hungry as a result. So what communications are being had at a UK level to make sure that we are maintaining those supply chains and the logistics of those supply chains to make sure all communities across the whole of the United Kingdom, rural and remote, are also covered by that?
Fergus Ewing.
Yes, Mr Sarwar raises another important point. I'm glad he has. The supply chain is crucial to keep society running, to keep shops supplied, to keep hospitals supplied, to keep prisons and all public sector agencies supplied with food, with provisions, with what they require to continue to operate. I just say two things. First of all, part of this is to do with maintenance of haulage and the ability of drivers to carry on, and that's an issue that I know the UK government is taking very seriously, because I've participated in conference calls with George Eustace where supermarkets, for example, have asked for appropriate dispensations to be given to the very necessary working time directive provisions which ordinarily apply but which need to be made more flexible in times of crisis. Has been given. And secondly, in relation to the wholesalers, I can share with Mr Sarwar that I had a lengthy discussion on Monday with the wholesalers in Scotland and their representatives, trade representatives, and we discussed many of these issues about what they require in order to continue to operate. Like all other businesses, they're affected by staff loss who have to self-isolate, and that's a practicality facing, I think, just about every business in the country at the moment, and likely to become far more serious over the short term. But I can assure Mr Sarwar that we are looking into, we are dealing with this on a continuous basis, and if he has any additional suggestions about what we might do, of course, I'm very happy to discuss them with him.
That concludes questions on the statement on the economy, COVID-19, and we'll move on to the next item of business.